Pinhead, oh Pinhead, how thy many pins glint in the white light of hell. I'm not horny for Pinhead, I swear. Yeah, maybe a little bit. He's just such an exquisitely unique horror villain with an excellent character design that I happen to get a little weak in the knees whenever I see him. I am legitimately angry that I got back into Dead by Daylight after his character was removed from the store. I sit in awe of Clive Barker's ability to come up with such an absolute legend of a horror icon. The man has a mind for the creatively grotesque.
Jenny, is this video just gonna be you blowing Clive Barker?
Yes, if you don't like it, there's a goddamn back button! So as you might guess, I am a Hellraiser fan. I saw the movie for the first time about a decade ago, and I feel like I rewatched it in 2021 right before I read The Hellbound Heart. And I was surprised to see how incredibly close the movie was to the novella, given that movie adaptations tend to be kind of off from the books. I felt like it might be worth to examine the two in depth and show just how well Hellraiser was pulled off as far as a book-to-movie adaptation goes. So in the novella, The Hellbound Heart, we predominantly follow charming young wife Julia Cotton as she and her husband move into the house that he's inherited from his grandmother. His brother, Frank, is out of the picture despite having slept with Julia shortly before her wedding to Rory 4 years earlier. The first scene in the book shows him solving Le Marchand's box and being taken by the Cenobites. As for the main plot, it's made clear that Rory and Julia's marriage is strained, particularly from Julia's side. Rory's a bit boring, especially compared to his brother. Meanwhile, Rory's friend Kirsty is helping them move into the house and resents Julia while silently pining after Rory. Kirsty is a bit of a sad sack, not an insult, just an observation. One day, Rory accidentally injures himself, bleeding on the floor of the spare room Julia happened to be standing in at the time. Frank begins to use this unwitting blood sacrifice of his brothers as a lifeline by which he can pull himself back into our world. He is metaphysically trapped in the wall of the attic in the Cenobites' realm, but is still able to view the attic from his prison. At one point, he's able to contact Julia. I think she sees a messed up vision of him, and tells her to bring him more blood. Julia complies. She brings 3 men back to the house for Frank to consume, and with each sacrifice, he progressively becomes more and more human again. Frank effectively sucks the life from his victims, turning them into withered husks. The second time she does so, Kirsty, having been asked by Rory to help figure out if something is going on with Julia, who's been distant lately, sees Julia leading the victim inside and naturally concludes that she's having an affair. Kirsty considers going to Rory immediately, but recognizes that if she doesn't dot her I's and cross her T's, that Julia could just kind of wriggle her way out of the accusation, and Kirsty will lose Rory's trust altogether. So she goes back a different day, incidentally the day Julia brings victim number 3 home, and creeps into the house. As such, she's there when said victim, half the life sucked out of him, tries to escape. Frank confronts Kirsty in his not quite fully formed state, dragging her to the spare room he's been hiding in and attempting to assault her. Kirsty manages to escape by grabbing Le Marchand's box and throwing it through the window, distracting Frank so she can escape. Kirsty grabs the box and runs off, eventually going into shock and being brought to a hospital. In the interim, Frank says that he needs one more sacrifice, a skin that he can wear over his newly formed body. Rory comes home and Julia says she has something to show him. Kirsty comes to in the hospital, wisely pretending that she doesn't remember anything. After being bored for a bit, she proceeds to pick up Le Marchand's box and solves it, causing the Cenobites to come calling. They tell her that because she solved the box, she has to go with them. Kirsty cuts a deal saying that she knows where Frank is and that she can bring them to him. The Cenobites agree, and basically they silently and visibly shadow Kirsty as she goes back to Rory and Julia's house. She goes inside, confronts Julia and Rory, the latter of whom claims that Julia showed him Frank, and with great effort they managed to kill him. Kirsty's about ready to piss herself since the Cenobites are rearing up to take her, but eventually she's able to tease out that Rory is, in fact, Frank. After Frank attacks her, Kirsty goes running. During the attack, Frank accidentally stabs Julia and then proceeds to suck the life out of her. Kirsty finds Rory's skinless body in the spare room upstairs. She baits Frank into admitting who he is, and the Cenobites come running to get old Frankie boy. They tell Kirsty to scram, and she leaves just after witnessing Frank being pulled apart. On the way out, Kirsty finds Julia's headless body. A light rises from it, calling itself the Engineer. Kirsty, officially done with this fuck shit, escapes outside as the house collapses. The Engineer finds her outside and manages to slip Le Marchand's box into her hand. Kirsty then beats a hasty retreat as the book comes to an end. So, that's the book. On to the 1987 movie adaptation Hellraiser. The first thing I have to say about this book is that it is pretty much, in terms of the events of the book, beat for beat similar. It's just that they added some stuff in and changed some minor details. So, the first difference is the opening scene. When Frank solves the lament configuration, which is alternatively referred to as Le Marchand's box, hooks come shooting out of the cube to hook into his skin as the Cenobites arrive. In the book, They arrive and talk to him for a bit. Unlike the movie, they actually go out of their way to ask Frank if he's sure that he wants to go with them. Hellbound Heart is interesting because there's a point of inconsistency. In the Hellraiser movies, it's mostly the case where if you open the box, the Cenobites come and take you whether you like it or not. In the book, they double check if Frank, who has deliberately solved the box, is sure he wants this. But later on, they do try to take Kirsty against her will, despite the fact that she solved the box in total ignorance. There are a variety of small changes from the novella to the movie. First, the book is strongly implied to take place in England, which makes sense because Clive Barker is British. In the novella, Rory is about 27 or 28, Julia is implied to be around that age as well, and Frank is the older brother at 29. In the movie, likely to accommodate Kirsty's reworked role, Rory, renamed Larry, I have no idea if there's a reason for that, and Julia appear to be in their 40s. This is an interesting change to the book since it's emphasized that Rory and Julia haven't been married for very long, and if I recall correctly, and I could be completely misremembering, there was some implication that Julia may have regretted hitching herself to Rory at such a relatively young age. Hellraiser is pretty much one for one where Julia and Frank's story is concerned. They nailed that pretty nicely, and frankly, no pun intended, they had no excuse not to. It's not a difficult story to adapt. Probably the most difficult part would have been the practical effects needed to show the transformation Frank went through as Julia helped him reconstitute himself, and the makeup and special effects departments deserve an award. I don't know if they got one, I hope they did, for how good they pulled off the stages of Frank's reassembly. Which, by the way, is done differently from the book, but to marvelous effect. This scene was so utterly fucked, and I loved every second of it. But Frank and Julia's relationship in the film carried a lot of the subtleties that were present in the book, namely that Frank is a hedonistic sociopath who's really only in it for the sex, and Julia is swept away by her husband's exciting bad boy brother. The implication in the book and the movie is that Julia is in love with Frank and doesn't quite understand that he's manipulating her for the thrill of it, and the sex, can't forget the sex. Although in the movie, I would argue that there is a slightly darker shade to Julia. In the book, it comes across like she's desperate for Frank and is willing to do whatever she has to in order to help him. But in the movie, I sense that she was progressively getting not just accustomed to the killing, but also enjoying it a bit. There's a scene about 45 minutes or so into the film where Frank has brought another sacrifice, and Julia is shown kind of casually wiping the blood from her hands as he consumes the victim. This is a sharp contrast to the first killing, where Julia was covered in blood and much shakier, implying a messier situation and lack of control. In this later scene, after she's shown kind of casually wiping her hands, it cuts to her sitting down with a drink, and this slow smile starts to spread across her face. It's very sinister, and again gives the impression that it's not just Julia reluctantly helping Frank because she is obsessed with him, or thinks she loves him, or cares about him. She's getting the bloodlust now. Anyway, I thought that was one interesting little difference between novella Julia and movie Julia. The biggest change from the book to the movie was... well, no, I wouldn't even call it a change necessarily. More like the biggest thing it adds to the movie is Kirsty Cotton. Where she was just a friend of Rory's in Hellbound Heart, in Hellraiser she becomes Rory's daughter and Julia's stepdaughter. In my opinion, making Kirsty Larry's daughter was a good choice. It gives Kirsty more reason to be involved in the plot and develop her as a character, and it also allows the film to introduce some other horror elements on her end. There are a few instances of this. The first and best, I would argue, involves Kirsty having a semi-prophetic dream that suggests that her father is going to die, which scares her so badly that she literally calls Larry in the middle of the night to check on him. The scene itself is just so 1980s horror classic. The scene gives me very similar vibes to Nightmare on Elm Street, with the child crying in the background and the blood soaking through the sheets, and I love it. I also think it adds some really, sad weight to the story, because if you've read the Hellbound Heart, you already know what's going to happen to Larry. I can't remember right now if they said outright what happened to Kirsty's biological mother in the film, but the lack of reference to her and the presence of a stepmother strongly implies that Kirsty lost her mom at some point in her life and is now deeply afraid of losing her father as well. It goes away to make the audience empathize with Kirsty and hope that maybe the film will end differently from the book. The scene where Kirsty comes upon Frank in his semi-formed state is also just so absolutely messed up, specifically because it really isn't that different from the book. In the book, when Kirsty confronts Frank, he behaves super creepily towards her and then attempts to assault her. Obviously, this is fucked up no matter how you spin it, but the movie somehow makes it both better and worse.
It's Frank. It's Uncle Frank.
No.
You remember?
No!
Come to Daddy.
Get the fuck off of me!
You've grown. You're beautiful.
Don't touch me! Don't touch me, or so help me!
What'll you do? What can you do? Bet you make your daddy so proud, don't you, beautiful? What makes the pleasure so sweet?
It actually does an amazing job of hammering home exactly how much of a degenerate Frank is. Being a creep is bad, but being a creep towards your niece is an entirely new level of messed up. The scene from the novella is dark, but this one is darker and actually manages to add a few more messed up layers beneath it. Much like the opening scene, the final confrontation with Kirsty, Frank, Julia, and the Cenobites is somewhat of a departure from the novella. Much like the book, Julia restrains Kirsty so that Frank can kill her and ends up stabbed herself. After that, Frank drains her just like his other victims. Frank pursues Kirsty through the house, and I really just have to pause here and appreciate that Kirsty's hiding places and the trajectory that she moves through the house almost perfectly mirrors how they're described in the book. Kirsty tricks Frank into admitting who he is, and then the Cenobites come out to play. Pinhead tells Kirsty that this is not for your eyes, which is basically what was said to her in the book. They hook old Frankie boy up, and then he proceeds to make an obscene motion towards Kirsty with his tongue. That's taken directly from the book, whereas the famous line he delivers right after,
Jesus wept,
is not. What happens next is kind of the big difference for the film. Kirsty tries to leave as it becomes clear the house is destabilizing, but is confronted by one of the Cenobites on the stairs. She retreats into a bedroom where she finds Julia's body laying in bed, hooks coming out of her face, and the lament configuration clutched in her hands. Kirsty pries it loose and proceeds to use the box to banish the Cenobites one by one. In the novella, when the Cenobites tell Kirsty to scram, she does, and they make no effort to stop her. She comes upon the engineer by chance after finding Julia's body, and then again outside when he slips her Le Marchand's box, but the Cenobites don't actually try to hurt her. In fairness, in the movie, when Kirsty offers up Frank in exchange for herself, Pinhead says that maybe he'll let her go. It's not a solid deal. I think the movie did actually add some consistency to the Cenobites in that respect. Again, in the novella, they made a point of asking Frank if he was sure he wanted to party with them. Then with Kirsty, they were just kind of like, "Little sorry, you solved the box. It's eternal pain party time." In the movie, they just stuck with,
"You solved the box. We came. Now you must come with us. Taste our pleasures."
In the movie, they just stuck with, "Open the box. Your soul is ours now, regardless of whether you meant to or not." That was one inconsistency in the novella that bugged me. But again, aside from what I've mentioned above, the movie in general does a great job at sticking to the novella's story. It keeps all of the important plot points. It adds things in to flesh out Kirsty as the kind of final girl. And honestly, it shouldn't shock me that they managed to stay pretty close in the novella, because Clive Barker directed this one and was able to bring what he wrote to the big screen in a meaningful way, probably because he had total, or at least majority, creative control over the project. Ah, God, I just love this movie so much. The 1980s vibe, the absolutely impressive practical effects, Kirsty being basically my favorite final girl. It's just such a good movie, and I was really delighted with how it managed to adapt the novella almost one for one. And the changes they did make ultimately serve both the story and the horror aspects of the film. So go forth and watch Hellraiser, read The Hellbound Heart. They are quality horror, and also they're doing a video game called Hellraiser Revival that's coming out in 2026, and it's worth it to know the lore before you plan on hitting it up. And if you end up liking the film and book, there are also several movie sequels. A novel called The Scarlet Gospels, a low-key sequel to The Hellbound Heart. It's tricky, it's weird, you have to read it to understand. And a metric ton of comics that Clive Barker has done in the Hellraiser universe for you to enjoy. And I hope that you do.